So today we are trying something totally new for the first time in our meetup. We're going to do mixed reality production. So the speaker will be standing here. And actually Mike, our first speaker, will present his slides in VR. So people that are watching the stream on a VR headset will see the slides come in 360 degrees from all over the place. And that is like boring, actually. we know that that's not what it's meant to be. Our goal in the future, as we develop this further, with Volker, who's sitting in the back, he's CEO of Spinor, the company that's providing the tech behind this, to have the presentation be very immersive and come to life as you're watching it in VR. So, like for example, we're talking about charts, then the charts will just pop in from the ground with like particle effects, and you can, or when you see numbers, it'll just come from infinity and like stop in front of your face. You'll never forget that presentation. So we hopefully will do all of our events using this immersive mechanism in the future. We're streaming it on our website, the MunchnLearn.com. That's Munch, letter N, learn.com. And you can watch it with Oculus, Vive, iPhone, Android phones. It doesn't work with DayDream. It does work with GearVR with a hack. You have to download an app that stops the Oculus app from launching so that you can get the regular cardboard mode. But that's all technical stuff. So with that, I want to welcome our host, Roger, to just come us and give us some background about what's going on here. So, yeah, on top of the yellow tape.
Legs apart, together.
There you go.
Okay. So, my name is Roger Rapport. I am a lawyer here at Procopio. I was an entrepreneur for 10 years, made all the mistakes in the book. So I just tell my clients, do what I didn't do or do what I did. Don't do what I did, and you'll be fine. Just 2 words about Procopio, because we have to pay for dinner. So Procopio is a full-service law firm headquartered in San Diego, about 200 lawyers and about 27 different practice groups. I have our emerging growth and technology practice group, so I deal with companies from inception through IPO. And yeah, a little bit of angel investing on the side. Talking about on the side, I have a little startup nights and weekends passion project called Access Silicon Valley. So we have lots of great videos with firesides with big VCs and entrepreneurs. And what you've got there is a couple of events we've got coming up. What I always try and do before this event is to just give you a couple of tips for your startup. And I was trying to think about what we could talk about tonight just for 2 minutes, and then I got reminded here by someone that I was chatting about this for convertible debt. Anyone raising money for their startup? Okay. If you're not a startup. One thing about convertible debt, I think people really are slaves to convention in Silicon Valley. And I just want to share one of the things that I do with convertible debt that may be of interest to you. So let's say someone said they're raising convertible debt. How much are you raising? Brian? Is it Brian? Yeah. How much are you raising all total? Okay. Okay. So let's say a client comes in and says, hey, we want to raise $1 million. Most people will say, okay, we're going to do a convertible note offering and offer $1 million. I say probably not. What you should do, and what I've done very successfully, is to say, why don't we, say we're raising $300,000 with the company reserving the right to raise an additional $700,000 in the event the round's oversubscribed. I've got 2 of my workbooks here for anyone that can tell me why it would be a good idea to carve it up that way. So you're raising a smaller amount with a bigger amount if the company is oversubscribed. Please, these are getting heavy in my hands. Someone, anyone, yeah. Exactly. First reason, psychological. Can I step off the... That's one. Any idea why you would, second reason why you would do it? Why? Exactly. You know, sir. So the first reason is totally psychological. Why? Because every investor wants what every other investor wants, and no investor wants what no investor wants. So when you are at 200, even though you're going for $1 million, and someone says, "Where are you?" and you go 200, oh, you're almost fully subscribed. And so they must think, yeah, this must be pretty good. They're almost there. You can go straight into the oversubscription right. The second reason that I do it is it's much more to protect the founders. Because what we say in the term sheet is in the event the company exercises its oversubscription right, it reserves the right to increase the cap and decrease the discount percentage. How can we get away with that? Well, the risk profile today is very different to the risk profile 6 months before your Series A. So the investor that comes in early is going to get a 20% discount and a $6 million cap. Someone that comes in 6 months before the Series A, it may be a 5% discount and a $10 million cap. It gives you the right to sell notes at different discounts and different caps depending on where you are in the raise process. Does that make sense? It really is such a powerful tool for founders because you don't get locked into a big discount and a low cap. So anyway, hope that's useful. Thank you all for coming, and it's a pleasure to have you guys here. And if you can get an opportunity to look at this at these slides through this VR headset, it is insane. It really is insane. I couldn't believe it. Great job, man.
Awesome. So now I'm gonna turn it on to Loreta, who's our co-organizer. And
okay, so like Mo said, this is the first time we're doing it, and I and Volker, who is way back in there, running the show to the online audience, have spent endless hours in making the technology side of things work first, and then fingers crossed that we could make it and repeat it in this setup as well. So thank you, first of all, Mike, for letting us use your presentation as a test platform for our viewers. Some things to keep in mind for those who are online actually right now. You're probably seeing my head cut off, probably Mo's was cut off. This whole setup is adjusted to Mike's height. So anybody who wants to repeat this presentation cannot be Lawrence's height, for example. We will be seeing only up to here. So things that may appear a little bit glitchy would be the background. Since it's a fabric, you might see some spots. Just be forgiving. This is our test platform. This is an experiment, and we are now seeing that it could be a success from all the feedback that we have gotten so far, and we look forward to actually talking to you later and getting all the feedback that you experienced on your end. There is probably about a minute of a delay from the live presentation to what is being streamed off of the cloud to your headsets. We will make sure that we cap it in a normal way so that it's the ending, and it's only one presentation that will be streamed, not two of the presenters will be in this setup. I guess with this out of the way, I will hand it off to Mike Boland. His slides are ready to fly around you for those who are online. And we will have, for the audience right here, we are recording the presentation in VR setup. And we have the Oculus Rift for those who will want to actually experience and see how it looks like for people who are watching it live. Okay? Thank you so much, Mike. Take it from here.
Okay. So you can all hear me? Yes, sounds like I'm coming through. I think, Mo, you're very modest in saying that it's boring. I actually got to experience this thing in the practice run. It's very cool. For those of you watching in VR at home, I'm going to be doing my best to give you stage directions because, as Mo mentioned, there are going to be slides kind of flying from different directions. So those of you here in the room, you're going to hear me doing that. Hopefully that's not too awkward. I'm talking to two different audiences at once, which is a first for me. So thank you guys for having me be part of your first kind of test case. This is very exciting. My name is Mike Boland, as Loreta mentioned. I'm editor of ARtillry, and over the next 20 minutes, I hope to go over some of the biggest kind of trends and opportunities that I'm seeing as an analyst looking at VR and AR. Quick bit about me. I'm a 12-year industry analyst, former tech journalist. My focus areas are emerging tech, but over the last year, I've really started to focus in and refine my coverage on VR and AR. That includes San Francisco chapter president of VR AR Association and contributions to places like Upload. And I just soft launched the company that I encourage you guys to all check out, which is called ARtillry, and it's the world's first publication and market research firm that focuses just in on augmented reality. And you can check that out at artillry.co, and the full release will be coming soon, but I welcome you to check it out until then. So VR and AR, of course, they're very interrelated. They are both very exciting. They are different, but also interrelated. We believe they're going to converge eventually. But I'm actually more excited about AR, augmented reality. And I think that VR has a lot of potential. I have a lot of fun looking at it. And I think that, as we'll go over in this presentation, it's still ripe for a lot of conversation and opportunity. But some of the reasons I'm more excited about AR include the fact that it's eventually going to be bigger. It's going to take longer, but it's going to be bigger. These are numbers from DigiCapital. These numbers have been kind of contentious in terms of their overall absolute values, but I only bring them up here in terms of the delta between virtual reality and augmented reality, in terms of eventual market opportunity and revenues. And some of the reasons for this kind of 3x delta are that AR, I think, will have a lot more commercial applicability to a wider range of verticals. It's going to be big in commerce and retail, in manufacturing and design, in enterprise. And another metric I usually like to look at as an analyst, which I call share of media time per day. So, there is a certain amount of time per day that we all spend with media. It's subdivided between different competing formats like television, radio, print media, online, mobile, all of these things. Now, VR, I think, is because of its full immersion, is really only eligible to take over a certain kind of amount of minutes or hours per day. Whereas AR, we're not there yet for lots of reasons, technically and culturally, but eventually it is conceivable that it can be worn throughout all kind of waking hours. So that's some of the reasons behind this just larger market addressable opportunity. Now, focusing just in on VR first. I always like to say we're in an iPhone 1-like moment with VR. Now, the iPhone 1, the first year that it was out in 2007, can anyone remember how many apps were available in the App Store, or just if you want to guess? And the people watching in VR can also guess, but I guess I won't hear the answer. But does anyone want to guess? That first year, before 2008, how many apps were in the App Store? Yeah. That's exactly right. The App Store didn't actually come out. That was a trick question, and you guys got it. The App Store didn't come out until 2008. So we often forget that the first year was just those 17 apps that shipped with the device, which kind of really limited the commercial appeal and the initial market penetration. Now, I mentioned that for two reasons. The first reason is that after the App Store came out, it opened up a developer environment, which led to years of third-party innovation and creativity all the way up until today, including lots of different use cases that were built on that initial hardware foundation and things that we never even thought of when the device first came out. Everything from Uber to Pokemon Go, excuse me. The other reason I mention this is that until we get to that point, we're now kind of stuck in these early days, just like the iPhone in that first year, where it's a classic chicken and egg challenge that we see with emerging technology, where there aren't enough apps or content to really sway mass adoption just yet. And conversely, there aren't enough hardware devices being sold in the marketplace to conversely compel content creators to get past the business case or justify the business case of investing in long-form content to really kind of fill those content libraries. So there are a few things that I'm observing that is kind of chipping away at this content chicken and egg situation. And for those of you watching, this next slide is going to be behind you. So if you can't see it, turn around. One of the things we're seeing is the diversification of the content libraries. So in early days, what we see is that 72% of consumer software revenue, this is data from Superdata, for games, or attributed to games. Now, by 2020, that overall pie is going to grow massively to roughly $15 billion in revenue. However, the share going to games is going to shrink and open the door for other forms of content, media and entertainment, and then also social media. That's important because it's going to start to broaden the content libraries to appeal to a wider swath of the mainstream public to really get VR kind of where we need it to be in terms of that mass adoption. Now, this next slide, for those of you watching VR, is immediately to my left, so it's over here. Back to the kind of hardware end of that chicken and egg challenge. These are a few headlines just from the past few weeks. These are things that were announced around GDC and Mobile World Congress. Google has shipped 10 million cardboard VR viewers. Sony reached a milestone of 100 million PSVR headsets sold. I mean, these are some important kind of hardware milestones that are, again, kind of chipping away at that chicken and egg challenge of content and hardware. Now, this slide, actually, for those of you watching VR, if you can't see it, look down. This is actually down and to the right. According to my calculations, total units sold so far for headsets is just under 17 million units. And, you know, that's really starting to segment into different kind of tiers that map to different kind of quality and price points. But the tier that everyone's mostly paying attention to is that top tier, PlayStation VR, HTC Vive, and the Oculus Rift. And within that tier, the clear winner in terms of units sold is the PSVR. And I think that holds an important lesson. It's not only at a smaller price point, but right out of the gate, it is automatically already compatible with 50 million existing units out there of PS4s. So that further lowers the adoption barrier. Oculus Rift, they just announced that what was previously a $600 headset with $200 for the touch controllers are now bundled together at a $599 price point. I think that's likewise creating a little bit of you know, buying empowerment and lowering those pricing upfront barriers to adoption. HTC hasn't lowered its prices, but it has announced a new pricing plan where you can get an HTC Vive for essentially $66 a month for a 12-month plan. We're also seeing elsewhere in the marketplace things like Windows Holographic, which is actually now called Windows Mixed Reality, and they're working with OEMs to kind of make headsets that are at about a $400 price point. At GDC, we also saw LG come out with a headset. So the point is there's a lot more kind of price competition out there that's really making these barriers to adoption lower a bit. So those of you watching in VR, this next slide is coming in to the left of me from the top. So some of the things that I believe represent the nearer term scalable opportunities for VR, given all those kind of pricing challenges, there are a few of them. One is location-based VR, and that includes VR theme parks and VR movie theaters. IMAX is doing a lot there, and VR arcades. And what this essentially does is it allows people to have these temporal or experiential VR experiences where they're essentially, instead of buying the hardware, they're renting it for a short time. And I think that lowers that adoption barrier. So we're going to see that, I think, in the near term as a business opportunity. And interestingly, there's a historical parallel there within the late 70s and 80s, before home game console ownership was ubiquitous. We saw this kind of same thing happening. So it's interesting seeing history repeat itself. Before that really becomes something that's ubiquitous for home ownership, it's going to follow that same evolutionary path. So there's a lot of opportunity. Another leading indicator there is all of the kind of location-based VR we see happening throughout Asia that I believe is going to start to replicate here in the U.S. So the other factor besides location-based VR that I think is going to really make the near-term opportunity for VR scale is mobile VR. So back to some of those hardware numbers. If you look at that top tier of VR hardware, so the Oculus Rift, HTC Vive, and the PSVR, according to IDC, their total sales are around 6 million, and they're going to grow to about 64 million units by 2020, and that's 10x growth in about 4 years, very healthy growth, and we're very bullish on that and supportive of that. But interestingly, it pales in comparison to the current kind of hardware that's ubiquitous in the marketplace, which is smartphones, which are 2.6 billion globally. So that really kind of screams out that the nearer term opportunity, though everyone's excited about that tier 1 VR, the near term opportunity is really going to be with mobile VR. And of course, that includes things like Cardboard. But what I'm referring to is that kind of developing mid-tier of the market that includes HTC Vive and Google DayDream. And Google DayDream is actually a platform I'm very bullish on for a lot of reasons. I think it's, for a lot of consumers, especially in the mainstream, a good enough platform, but also one that is really going to start to scale. I think Google's going to put a lot of muscle behind this. Google is known for making big moves wherever it can really position itself at the front door of a new media, and that's exactly what it did with Android about 10 years ago. So I think what we see happening with DayDream is going to be analogous, and another kind of historical parallel. I know that's kind of a threaded theme here, I'm starting to realize, with what it's done with Android. So I think the way that's going to play out is that we're going to see more and more devices that carry Android Nougat and also the hardware specs to be compatible with DayDream. And then from there, there's going to be essentially a larger addressable market of compatible devices when developers are making the decision about where to develop. They're naturally incentivized to have a larger reach. So then from there, you're going to have more content from that factor, and then in turn, there's going to be more content and more user appeal. So it's kind of a virtuous cycle that we're going to see happen with DayDream that's going to position it as a platform that I think is going to be very strong. I'm recommending to a lot of clients and others that I talk to, especially media companies that are curious about where they place their chips, where they start to develop. It's going to be a good kind of first step platform for a lot of companies getting into VR. And this slide actually should be, for those of you watching on VR, should be right next to the previous one, so it should be evident of where you can see it. Still kind of staying for a second on mobile VR, I think it's interesting because it's going to represent both the short-term and the long-term opportunity for VR. The short-term for all the reasons I mentioned, cost, accessibility. Then we're going to move into a phase, what I call phase 2, which is going to be around 2018 to 2020, when PC and console VR will become more ubiquitous. We'll see Moore's Law kick in. We'll see capabilities increase and price come down for all those higher-end features, things like positional tracking and frame rates and other things that are developing in parallel, like haptic feedback. And then right around 2020, I believe we're going to go into a phase, which is essentially phase 3, that's the best of both worlds. That is, all that high-end functionality we associate with tethered VR, but in an untethered package. And I think as that happens, it's going to be interesting because when the use case is freed up a little bit, we're going to see more kind of development around that more, I guess, portable type of use case in terms of the apps that are developed. I think it's important to note, too, that the same goes for AR in terms of that mobile story, how it's going to be mobile and smartphones are going to represent the nearer-term opportunity. And for those of you watching on VR, this slide is kind of close to me. You can see it up to the left. So mobile VR, for all those same reasons of just kind of hardware penetration, and I think not just for the kind of technological reasons and cost reasons that are driving that concept in VR, as I just went over, but the additional factor of kind of cultural acclamation and cultural acceptance. As I mentioned earlier, because VR is something we're wearing all day, potentially eventually out in public, that kind of cultural acceptance factor is really going to be key. So I think for a lot of those reasons, and I think we learned that from watching Google Glass, one of the reasons that it kind of tanked in early days was before its time, but also just culture wasn't ready for that use case. And in addition to smartphones, there's another kind of wild card in this scenario that I've been looking at, which is other forms of AR that aren't necessarily graphical. We always think of AR as a graphical overlay to the world around us. And I've been thinking in terms of kind of audible. And what I mean by that, one example is if you look at some of the kind of smart earbuds that are coming into the market, the most popular one is probably Apple's AirPods. That engenders a use case because they're so small and sleek to essentially leave them in your ear all day, which then opens the door, I believe, for a kind of ambient audio channel that kind of whispers in your ear to inform you about your surroundings. So I think it carries a lot of the tenets and the values of what we're looking for in kind of the when AR's day kind of gets here. But I think that'll happen sooner and be more of a kind of audible kind of layer on top of our perceived world as opposed to graphical. So I think there's going to be a lot of other kind of creative ways this develops around that. So in the meantime, we're seeing kind of this proposition of mobile AR. already start to develop. There we go. I was actually talking to Matt about this earlier. You know, some of the early examples that are really kind of testing out the marketplace and revealing some of the user acclamation and user appeal around mobile AR are things like Snapchat 3D stickers and, of course, Pokemon Go. Now, whenever you say these, there are a lot of people that kind of jump down your throat that this is like not true AR. And in some ways, they're right. I think true AR or eventually evolved AR is getting to the point of graphical overlays that have interactions with the physical world in more dimensionally accurate ways. So things that can kind of hide behind trees or take advantage of the entire kind of light field and utilizing technologies like point clouds. And but the point is, and I was talking about this with Matt, whether or not this is true AR doesn't matter. What matters is that these technologies have done AR a favor by acclimating the mainstream audiences to basically get used to and start to gain kind of affinity for these AR-like experiences, so that when true AR really does arrive, the adoption cycle will be faster because everyone would have already gotten kind of hooked on the gateway drug that is Pokemon Go. Winding down, there are several things here that I'll reiterate from like the last 20 minutes of presenting. Some of the winning factors in VR and AR, and also some of the just kind of orbiting factors that are going to affect the mainstream scalability. One is cost. I didn't mention it earlier, but a company called EDAR has done a study, basically consumer research and surveys, where they found out that it's only about 10% of the population is willing to pay $500 or more for a VR headset. So it's no coincidence that you're starting to see $400 as a price point that's being kind of a target for a lot of companies that are announcing upcoming products. I mentioned Windows Holographic and Windows Mixed Reality. They're working with a number of OEMs to kind of hit a $400 price point, and I think that's going to be a key thing to watch to get to that kind of scalability, to the next kind of level of inflection point for market adoption, is when we can kind of get below that $400 price point in a realistic way. Mobile, for the reasons I mentioned, the installed base of mobile hardware there make it so much more of a scalable and tenable solution, even though it's not as sexy as the higher-end VR hardware. Accessibility, is an important point too, where we see a lot of kind of location-based VR experiences out of the home. People aren't going to be buying these things yet, so allowing them to experience it in more temporal ways, I think, is going to represent a good kind of near-term business opportunity. Style and comfort is an interesting point too. Matt, we also talked about this, and one of the challenges that faces VR and AR, especially probably AR, that didn't face a lot of the previous kind of technological transformations, such as the PC or the commercial internet or mobile, is this sense of style, because it's something that we're going to be eventually, the proposition is to be wearing them. And you could argue that with smartphones, design is a factor for choosing the devices we're carrying around, but not as much as something you're putting on your face. And again, it's not just the kind of hardware itself, but the education to the marketplace and the overall market acclimation, where not just the person wearing it worrying about what it looks like or how sleek it is, but also everyone around them. There are privacy concerns there. There's a lot there that I think still need to be hammered out. And then lastly, native functionality. For developers of both VR and AR, but kind of probably more so VR in the nearer term, to really pay attention to building things that make sense natively with the functionality and the capabilities of VR platforms. And another historical parallel I'll give there is that the most successful apps and sources of content we saw with the mobile revolution, or the smartphone revolution, which started about 10 years ago, were the things that really, took advantage of the natural capabilities of this new platform, rather than shoehorning a desktop experience or desktop content or apps onto a smaller screen. So we're talking about things like the accelerometer and the GPS and the camera and the apps that really take advantage and push the kind of development to the extent of the platform that's available. And examples of that are things like Waze and, again, Pokemon Go and Uber, and a lot of these success stories I think really hold that kind of common winning factor. So the translation is, with VR, the apps I think that we're going to see be the most successful from a development perspective, from an investment perspective, are those that really kind of carry that principle and develop for the full capabilities of the platforms. And that full capabilities is certainly a moving target when you look at things such as room scale and eye tracking and haptic feedback and all these things that are going to come into the picture. But those that really, I think, keep up with that, rather than just kind of take 2D media and put it in an immersive environment. Mo actually kind of alluded to that concept earlier. I think that's going to be very important. And again, a lesson we've learned in the previous tech kind of revolution that I think has some good historical parallels and good learnings for going forward. So that is actually, that's it for me. I have time for questions, and I look forward to also integrating and talking to you guys after. For those of you watching in VR, this slide is actually left of me on the floor, so look down and you can see contact information.
Okay, questions. We need to get that on camera.
Okay. Mike, thank you so much. That was very informative. How do you see the, do you see this more as a downloaded apps, or do you see it as more streaming?
That's a good question.
Talk about bandwidth issues?
Yeah, so bandwidth is going to be a major issue. So when you look at, just the simplest form of 360 video, there's a lot more bits, obviously, than 2D video. But then when you get into things like stereoscopic, that's ×2. And then when you get to 4K, everything kind of multiplies by 2. So those data payloads really start to amplify pretty quickly. So I think what we're seeing in the marketplace now, especially with VR, is they're largely kind of downloaded experiences. There are exceptions. I mean, I for one, sometimes will look at videos on YouTube, in cardboard mode. And I think that's very much a kind of dumbed down version of the video. So I think there are two things there. We see, the advent, or like at least the horizon of 5G rollouts that we're hearing about, and I think that's going to be even further in the future than a lot of people are saying. So I think that when that opens up, there will be more streaming capability, especially for kind of on-the-go experiences, and then also compression technologies. One thing I'm very bullish on is compression technologies to essentially, build codecs that more efficiently use the limited bandwidth you may have, and not just bandwidth, but processing power. Like, these are all little bottlenecks, but bandwidth is certainly one of them.
So you raised some parallels between 2007 with mobile and 2017 with VR. And one of the things we saw play out with mobile was what they call BYOD, or bring your own device. Yeah. And so I'm curious to hear your thoughts on if you think that trend will also happen with VR and AR.
I hope so, because I think right now you see these kind of walled gardens develop where it's kind of siloed, and you see a lot of games, for example, that come out as exclusives. And a lot of people talking against, how that's just bad for the overall ecosystem, and I agree. And I think the bring your own device kind of trend was largely in the enterprise. Is that what you're referring to? Yeah. So I think that will require, I guess, better interoperability, where you can, people can bring all different types of hardware and have it be interoperable with whatever kind of operating system or software is endorsed by a given organization. So I hope that we get to the point where there's better interoperability to have that BYOD kind of day come for VR. But I think there's going to be some challenges, because at early days, it is pretty siloed.
More questions? Let me check how many minutes I have left on camera. We have 7 more minutes. If any questions?
Kind of following up on the first gentleman's question, how do you see issues of latency factoring in? If you're watching a streaming experience and you're a single person watching it by yourself, that's one thing. But if you're trying to interact at a distance with someone else as part of a community experience, current IP video streaming technologies have a lot of latency because of the mechanisms around adaptive bitrate streaming and so forth. Who is sort of innovating in that space, and what point in the future do you think that's going to be a solved problem?
I think latency is a big issue, because that relates to probably the sticking point for a lot of people, especially in the public for VR, which is nausea. And latency certainly kind of ties right to that. Now, I think that there are examples of things that I've seen that are interesting. And again, it's that concept of kind of making more efficient use of what you have in terms of both bandwidth and processing power. At OC3, Oculus announced their kind of time warp feature, which essentially will doctor your way towards 90 frames per second by essentially inserting frames, replicating and inserting frames. So it's kind of a way to trick the eye to not feel that latency. I think some of the clever kind of software engineering around the problem will get us there. And then also just kind of the natural march of Moore's law and better bandwidth and all of these things. It's just, there's all these moving parts and they're all kind of advancing in parallel. And I think that that latency problem, hopefully will get to the point where that's not an issue so that developers can focus on these bigger, hairier problems rather than like the plumbing. But until we get there, especially in streaming contexts, it's absolutely a problem. So I think where it's being, improved is in that tier 1 where you have like, hundreds of Oculus engineers working on it, but not so much, for where a lot of VR is being consumed, which is in a streaming fashion. You're going to get that, at least for the foreseeable future, unfortunately.
Yeah, hi, thanks. How and where do you see the social networks getting more involved with both AR and VR? How do you see that future playing out for
Sure.
tighter integration?
Yep. I think that
Mike, I would like to use this microphone.
Oh, sure. Oh, it's clipping. Okay. I'm very bullish on social as a use case and as like a killer app for VR overall. And, and some support of that is so is Mark Zuckerberg. And he spent $1 billion on that bet. And I believe that the ability for, watch, far-flung relative babies' first steps, everything from that to collaborative workspaces and the ability to interact with other people that are far away, I think that's going to be a major use case and a major driver of not just VR overall, but I think that's something that the mainstream public can get their brain around as a value proposition. Anyone's kind of grandmother can understand the appeal of watching babies' first steps, as opposed to kind of where we are right now with VR, where the majority of usage and dollars are going into things like games, which is a kind of limited market. So I think for a lot of reasons, you can start to see a lot of companies do interesting things there. Facebook has already shown some of the mock-ups of what they want to do in these kind of social environments. I think they're going to be the leader there just because of the amount of money they're going to put behind that. You also see interesting players like Allspace VR that are kind of, bringing together meetups like this, but with these kind of avatar-based, cartoony environments. So I think it's going to be a major driver.
I think we have time for one more question.
I think there's one in the back there.
Yeah, hand the microphone.
Sure.
Thank you. So I have a question about AR hardware. So we know Lenovo released a phone, a Tango device last year, and Asus announced another phone will be released this year. So do you see a trend like phone manufacturers putting depth sensors into new devices, or do you see? I mean, we also heard some rumors about Apple as well.
Yeah.
So do you see that coming? Thank you.
Sure. Do you want me to wait for that one? Okay. So there are a lot of rumors about the next iPhone. If that will be an AR-centric device, or at least have some of the innards that are required, like depth sensing and room learning and all that good stuff. Until then, you're going to continue to see Tango be the leader there. And you're right, the Fab 2 Pro from Lenovo was the first device, and now they're coming out with more and more. I think just like this gentleman's social question, some of those AR use cases are going to have a lot more appeal to growing AR into the public, such as being able to, redesign your living room. And it's funny, Amazon is actually getting very much behind this, and they're going to be another big player that pushes it, because what they want to do is they want to reduce the amount of returns they get for flat screen TVs. And if people have a more informed, purchase, that it actually fits on their wall using, a Tango infused phone to be able to really just see what it's going to look like with proper measurements, that's something that will reduce the amount of returns, because they lose a lot of money on returns for those big TVs. So that's just one example, but I think that, yeah, you're going to see OEMs more and more, especially as the price comes down, start to integrate the necessary hardware to run something like Tango. And I think you're going to see a lot of OEMs step into it slowly because they don't see enough market demand yet, but it's going to slowly build up through these first few players, and then they're going to see enough of a value proposition, or at least an ROI, to invest in that hardware up front, because it's going to be a really appealing kind of competitive use case to buy a phone that runs, those cool capabilities, Tango, and then moving into, I think, other providers. We'll see what Apple does, though. That's always a black box. Matt might have some stuff to say about that.
That's it for Mike.
Thank you, everyone. This is fun. I can step away.
You can step away.
I feel like I'm glued here.
You've been here for a long time. You were holding your position really well. without moving the background. So for the online audience, this is the part where we cut off and this stream is over. Apologies about that. There might have been some issues with the audio, which I noticed only later in the event. So this is not the streaming issue, by the way. This is just the microphone, the lavalier microphone issue, so that you know. Hopefully you have figured out that you would have had to stand up in order to view all the slides. I forgot to mention that the best viewing experience was supposed to be standing. Anyway, this is the end for the streaming. We'll follow up later with you. We're moving back to the live event now.